Quantum physics helps us to explore consciousness in a slightly different way. And that is when we begin to realize the participation of the observer, of the individual, and the interaction that the individual is having with the outside world. And that's where you begin to realize that consciousness is actually not inside alone, but it's all around. Scalar energy is more, if you like, the empty space that we see around us. Scalar energy is the rays of the sun. Scalar energy is everywhere. It's kind of like a phenomena. You also find it in nature. Cymatics helps us to realize that there is a lot more to sound and vibration that we feel led to believe. And it was one of the pieces of my puzzle to recognize that everything that I had gone and learned in neuro-linguistic programming had more of a substantiation and context all of a sudden. What Dr. Emoto had discovered was that thoughts create patterns in water and affect the water, because water, we now know, is programmable, just like crystals. Reality comes from your imagination. Reality is coming from your vibrations. Reality is coming from the information that is surrounding you based on your vibration.
Strap yourselves in, because today's episode we are diving deep into some of the biggest discoveries about the nature of reality. Fundamental stuff that really we should be taught in schools. So joining me today is Pooya Ahmadi, author of an upcoming new book called Food, Love and Quantum Physics. Welcome to the New Earth Frequency podcast. Thank you for joining me, Pooya.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you for inviting.
So Pooya, someone who is new to exploring metaphysics, what is some of the biggest things, or the biggest thing that most of us assume is true about reality that quantum physics just completely overturns? And how has that changed your life?
Big question. I would say that the biggest thing that we assume is that we are solid. Everything in this world is solid. And we also assume, or we've been taught, that we're not actually as powerful as we are. And for me, the realization that the reality could be completely different than what we've been taught has brought more fluidity into my life. And by that, I mean the possibilities are endless. And as we go through this discussion, we will understand why everything is much more potentiality than the solid forms that we see. So everything is subject to change, and the person or the power that changes it is actually us.
And what does quantum physics tell us about the nature of reality? And is it fair to sort of say that quantum physics is really the physics of consciousness?
I don't know if I would say it's the physics, that quantum physics is the physics of consciousness. It certainly hints at many different aspects of reality. We believe consciousness, I mean, some believe consciousness is a byproduct of brain activity, which I find so incomplete. And so now, after my research, I find extremely naive. Consciousness quantum physics helps us to explore consciousness in a slightly different way. And that is when we begin to realize the participation of the observer, of the individual, and the interaction that the individual is having with the outside world. And that's where you begin to realize that consciousness is actually not inside alone, but it's all around, and it's more like a field rather than something that is a byproduct of brain activity. So quantum physics helps us to understand consciousness a little bit more. Having said that, it is still a work in progress. I don't think anyone can necessarily say they understand any of it 100%.
Before we go deeper, I'd love to ask you what the genesis of your book, Food, Love, and Quantum Physics was, and what compelled you to write it, and why those three things together, and why now?
It's the book chronicles my own journey through trials and tribulations, some ups and downs, and a pivotal point in my life when food, or rather eating, became difficult. And it had been something that had been going on for a very, very long time. But at that particular pivotal point, I needed to make a decision about how I was going to overcome this because it was getting more and more difficult, and it was a repetitive thing, and you got to eat every day. So it was something that once I put in process what I felt would help me to overcome this, I then stumbled across self love. And by really understanding that everything is a connection with yourself first, and everything that I had researched into quantum physics, various other actually, including knowledge, including ancient wisdom, I realized that quantum physics could explain it. Um, and for me, it was phenomenal to think that everything that ancient wisdom had been telling us, everything that indigenous people had been telling us, is right there in quantum physics, but it's not highlighted necessarily. So for me, I thought if I had access as a young girl to a book like this, something that could be extremely simple, accessible, so that people could begin to really um, comprehend the principles of quantum physics, but with the background of an everyday story. And my story is an everyday story, I think.
So on that, what would you love the reader of your book to sort of walk away with? What are you trying to reach them on about?
Most importantly for me is for each individual to begin to realize their own power, to begin to really truly embody a new form of, a new imaginative way of living, to be able to transcend what is and to move towards what is desired. These would be the key points for me. Um, I think it would be really important that just for individuals to understand their own power, for human beings to understand their own nature, and to really know who they are and what they are. I think those would be the key points that I hope people will take away. And to feel also not where I came from, my journey made me feel quite isolated many times. And I think it would be brilliant if this book could reach people in their heart for them to know that they're not alone, that everything is connected and everyone is connected.
I was privileged enough to be able to read one of the chapters in your book, which is not yet published. And in that chapter, you were exploring a lot of the major breakthroughs and discoveries over the last 2 centuries in quantum physics. What would you say is like the biggest breakthrough that sort of dismantles, or the biggest discovery that I guess dismantles the old idea of the fixed mechanical universe that we're taught to believe, that we grow up conditioned to believe?
My God, I think it has to be the double slit experiment. The double slit experiment was an experiment by Thomas Young. I think it's over, well, definitely over a century ago. And in a nutshell, it was about light particles going through two slits, and the recognition that when it was being observed, it behaved differently than when it wasn't being observed. And the fact, the so the experiment on one side, but the Copenhagen interpretation, which is one of the interpretation of this, of the way waves, particles and waves can be interchangeable. And the Copenhagen interpretation was at the Solvay conference in 1927, where for the first time it was tabled some of the biggest giants in physics and quantum physics theory, tabled that it is absolutely impossible for an experiment of any kind to be carried out where the person carrying out the experiment is not changing the results. And therefore, the observer had an effect on the experiment. And so nothing was certain. The certainty was taken out. And ironically, the smartest man in the world, or so we think, Einstein, brilliant man, but he was one of the biggest opposition to this theory. But quantum, the that Copenhagen interpretation prevails even today. And when I realized that nothing was for certain, and we are actually participating in everything that is going on, that changed my reality. That completely changed everything for me.
In the chapter I read, you talk about John Wheeler with the quote that nothing no, let me without without the observer, the universe does not exist.
Yes.
Like, I guess how can we understand that observer effect in our practical lives, apart from the fact that we can't really hold on as what we're seeing as any one truth, or experiencing any one truth and having a claim to any one truth.
I think while it started for me on a theoretical level, it then I became curious to put this into experimentation. John Wheeler's, I mean, a brilliant man, a man that says that the reality is being formed by the answers to the questions we ask. And I think that is so profound because, in many ways, I often say it's the questions that we need to refine because the answers will come, and there are many different answers to a question. But the question, the more profound the question, the more thoughtful that question is, then the answers are um, are going to be more profound also. So, in many ways, what John Wheeler was saying was that, and John Wheeler's commentary, by the way, is very much in line with what ancient wisdom is saying, and some of the philosophies that have been going on for thousands of years. John Wheeler was saying, where Einstein was saying that the universe is out there and then we exist separately to the universe, John Wheeler, a contemporary of his, was saying, no, we are the universe, observing ourselves grow, which is, in a way, more plausible because we don't seem to be able to find the tiniest particle, and we don't seem to be able to find the end of the universe because every time we look in either direction, we find more. The more sophisticated our equipment become in being able to detect the end of the universe or detect the smallest particle or uh, thing that exists, the more we find more edges and we push the boundaries, which tells me that the more we expect to find, we do find. And if you bring that principle back into our own life, my emphasis in the book is with what kind of observational lens and what kind of programming are we watching our own life unfold? Because we are doing a great job in trying to explore what's out there, but how much do we actually explore what's in here? Because your observational lens is very much based on your programming, your thoughts, your ideas, and obviously your frequency and vibration, which we will go into a little bit more.
In the book, in the chapter, that I read, you talk about the discovery of Nikola Tesla, which I found really interesting about scalar energy. And I'm just going to read a quote. So, Nikola Tesla said, "If you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." Can you share with us more about what Nikola Tesla discovered about scalar energy? Well, what is it?
Yes.
And it's linked to our DNA, which I thought was really interesting.
When I first discovered scalar energy, reading and researching about Nikola Tesla, and I mean, he didn't. He was not the first, and I often say there is nothing new under the sun. We are constantly rediscovering and rediscovering. But when, as you may already know, he was absolutely obsessed with alternate energy, which was alternate current, which was completely opposite to Edison and what he was doing, which was the direct current. But at some point, he stumbled across scalar energy, and scalar energy is more, if you like, the empty space that we see around us. Scalar energy is the rays of the sun. Scalar energy is everywhere. It's kind of like a phenomena. You also find it in nature. Everything has its own scalar energy. You and I have scalar energy, which is called a bio. Um, it's kind of a bioscalar, and what it basically is, it's more like it's difficult to measure it. It's not like hertz, where you have a starting point and a finish point, and you can measure that. But the movements are, when it does move, it has it kind of has the same shape as our own DNA, and therefore it resonates in exactly in the same way. It's much easier for us to feel suspended in peace, is the best way I can put it, which is why people feel so good in the sun or in nature. And now there are such things as scalar rooms that have been set up. I was quite shocked to realize that there are hundreds of them literally just popping up all over the world. And I obviously had to experiment, and I had to go and I've slept in one, and I have spent a few hours. And what tends to happen, the first thing that you feel is extreme sense of relaxation. And what happens is when you are so relaxed, your entire body goes into there is nothing to fight, I can heal. So it begins your body's intelligence is so profound that the moment it starts to relax, it fixes everything that needs to be fixed. Now, Nikola Tesla was obsessed with the pyramids. He absolutely he didn't believe that it was a tomb of any kind. He believed that the shape, the geometry, the sacred geometry that had been used, it was all leading to somewhere. And now we understand a lot more about the pyramids. What he actually said was, I can't prove the existence of scalar energy, but I know how to harness it. And that is when he began to use um, wireless electricity, going from basically one to the other, where what essentially was happening was, on the one hand, the power was disappearing and then reappearing somewhere else. So we owe all of that to Nikola Tesla. And what he believed was this power is so profound that if it was harnessed correctly, then we could light up the world essentially for free.
And you mentioned about there being rooms going into a scalar room or scalar energy room. There's actually someone here in Ibiza that does that. I'm curious, like, is it a machine? It is it. You say it doesn't. It's not hertz. What is it emitting? Because in the chapter I read in your book, you talk about how the scalar energy in nature, and there is a reason why when we're stepping into nature, we feel immediately calm because it has a resonance with our DNA, I'm
Yes.
to if I understand that correctly. So that's nature. I guess how does a room mimic the same sort of
So they are
scale?
still waves, scalar waves, um, and to be precise, we can also produce scalar waves.
Right.
So you do find them. It's a phenomena that we find it in nature, and the sunlight has it, the moonlight, almost everything that is natural around you has it, including you and I. But we can also produce scalar waves, and these rooms are using computers to produce scalar waves. And essentially, you are in this room surrounded by these waves that are being harnessed within the space. Um, and people also like William Reich, he also found he coined the term argon energy for various different reasons, but he also found ways to harness it into his argon accumulator, where he used organic and non-organic material to be able to bring the scalar waves essentially into somewhere and to capture it. And then he would put people into his accumulators to basically feel better.
And this is, you mentioned Reich. That's different from Raymond Reich,
Yes.
which is also covered in the chapter about. Now, I had heard of Reich before because I had watched something about how, and now I'm not sure what decade he had developed, discovered that emotions have a frequency, a vibration. You know, you have the emotion of love, which is a higher vibration versus sort of lower frequency, literally frequency emotions like hate and anger and fear. And he was starting to experiment, and I hope you can explain more around developing like machines that could have a certain healing frequency. So for a particular disease, that has a certain frequency, he was able to treat those patients with, I guess, sound vibration or frequency to
Yeah,
treat that disease. I'm so fascinated by that, and you do cover that in the chapter. Could you please explain what you know about that discovery?
sure. I mean, he was Raymond Reich in he perfected a microscope in the 1930s, early 1930s, where for the first time you could see these microorganisms at 60,000 times the actual size. And it was the first time that we could actually observe microbes and viruses in that way. By being able to observe these, he began to realize that it had its own particular frequency. Um, and ironically, Reich was of the same opinion that because he had also been homeschooled and he was watching nature and he understood so many things that we just don't simply observe that closely now. So what then Reich did was, this is Royal Reich. What he then did was he said, if everything is vibrating at its own energy or frequency, especially viruses and microbes and bacteria and everything else, he thought, what if I was to create a vibration, a machine that produced frequency? And then I played back that frequency to those microbes or viruses and see what would happen. Now, it sounds woo woo until I mention to anybody, what about um, an opera singer? An opera singer can blow a glass. And in fact, there are many people who can take their finger with water and they can test the rim, they can hear the frequency, and then they can match that frequency when they sing, and it will blow the glass. But nothing else in the room is affected. So it was exactly the same principle that Reich was applying to viruses and bacteria, recognizing that this is that diseased cell could be destroyed without destroying anything else in its surroundings. And he did that because he actually had invented the machine that could observe them. And so all of these various different uh, amazing minds were talking about the same thing. The fact that vibration, energy, and frequency were some of the fundamental uh, principles of our reality.
Yeah, and it does beg the question of these discoveries, why were they shut down? Why didn't nobody seem to be talking about them at the time? And of course, I'm not really into conspiracy theories, and I don't necessarily want to go into detail about that, but you do question that when these amazing discoveries and experiments were happening, and then where are they now?
I would say that the best way to the best way to tackle that question is to say perhaps we didn't know better. Perhaps we felt that we could um, push uphill and find our own solution sometimes the simplest solutions seem too simple. And perhaps with everything that had been going on with the expansion, the Industrial Revolution, with the expansion of um, the mechanical way in which we build our lives, all of a sudden, all of this kind of stuff seemed to woo woo. Because what do you mean? You're talking about frequency, you're talking about light being healing, you're talking about voice being healing. And these are all very ancient principles that I guess at some point we, and I say we collectively because we are all one in many ways as in terms of principle, we thought that we are progressing, that we are actually we are a part of an evolution. We understand much better than 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. But that isn't necessarily true. We are standing on the shoulders of giants who some of whom really understood, but perhaps we just weren't ready as humanity. But it is time. It is time to embrace these new principles.
And that's why we're a lot of us are going back to the ancient wisdom. And you do touch upon that in your book, particularly the Vedas tradition, which is one of the oldest,
Yes.
right? What are the sort of the major sort of ancient wisdom that you, well, even just the Vedas, what the Vedas tradition teaches us, and how do you think they had access to that wisdom back then?
One of the things I've discovered is that first and foremost, they had a much better connection, generally speaking, they all had a much better connection to nature. They were far less distracted in terms of, and also there was much less distracted in terms of everything that we do. You know, today's life is all about being busy and working and, but most importantly, we live in an environment where there is so much frequency um, interference. So we are not in a place where we can feel the vibrations of nature as much. We don't spend as much time in nature. So I think part of their connectivity was definitely to do with that. But I think indigenous people more than anything else are the people we can look towards or look to understand traditions that they have not yet lost. And when you look at those traditions, you recognize that there are certain principles that have been passed down generation to generation that talks about the interconnectivity of all things. And when you truly in your body um, believe that everything is connected, your entire belief system becomes different. Your respect for everything and everyone and every animal, everything becomes completely different. And I think they understood the cosmos, generally speaking, much better. They understood the nature of reality much better. They had much more respect for uh, the thoughts, the energy, the frequency, the vibration. How they knew it, we don't quite yet know, in terms of, for example, the ancient civilizations that built sites like Göbekli Tepe, or even the pyramids of Giza, or the pyramids in Chichen Itza, or in South America, or in the Amazon. We don't quite know, but we do know that they were extremely advanced, purely because of the alignment, the sacred geometry, uh, the alignment to the stars. So they actually had full knowledge of as above, so below, a principle that we are now beginning to embrace once again, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Getting back to your point around the interconnectivity, how they had that knowledge of that we are all connected. Quantum entanglement, something we often hear. Some of us don't fully understand or need reminding. Now, this is when two particles in two different locations, or it can be explained this way, can still influence each other. I guess in practical terms, how can we understand quantum entanglement? And I guess what does that mean for our everyday lives?
So Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. Um, Quantum entanglement is actually the easiest way to think about it is a mother and child will always be entangled. They share in many ways. They have at some point shared the same cells, and so they are completely entangled. Which is why sometimes you will hear mothers say, "Oh my God, I knew the moment he'd had that accident," or um, if there is something, they will pick up the phone and they will call. The reason is that once two particles become entangled, they both feel the same thing. Um, and the spooky action at a distance that he was referring to is what they've actually done is they have managed to um, take the particles, separate them, but they have been entangled to begin with. And what they've realized is that when you make an effect, make this one cold and it has a certain response, the other one has the same response in real time as if it was happening to it. And so, in many healing traditions, for example, when, let's say, two people separate, and let's say, uh, I wanted to move on with my life and I go and have this healing, what you will often find is certain healing schools of thought will say to you, we need to disentangle you from this partner. And the reason is that when you are in a relationship, you become entangled. You begin to um, share the same, almost become part of each other's space, so to speak.
Mm,
And so it's a very simple principle in many ways, if you think about it, because everything is connected through this consciousness that we talk about, through this field that everybody says is empty space, but it's actually is untapped potential energy. So it simply means how do two things remain connected? Well, there is absolutely no time space in in reality, so to speak, in quantum physics, beyond the Planck scale, beyond, if you like, the smallest measurable scale of anything, there is no time. And so, yeah, that's why the particles, if you like, in even how, no matter what distance they are apart, once they're entangled, they will experience things in real time, both of them.
yeah. And, non-locality is something that's sort of hard to get our human heads around. Non-locality, there's no such thing as time in ultimate reality. There's only here and now. It's mind bending sort of stuff. But I guess it gives us a glimpse into the fact that this can be explained, this non-locality, with quantum entanglement to a degree.
Yes, and
Um,
also what I discovered was even though you get get these particular things like there is no time, time is a man made construct, and principles that don't really resonate with us when we hear it. We're like, this is kind of cuckoo land. The way I have embraced it is to build my case, so to speak, or build my puzzle based on many different pieces to recognize that the solidity and the rigidity of life is just simply is so. And so by recognizing that and accepting that, it has helped me to change my tomorrow and change the trajectory of the direction that I want to go, recognizing that I can use these principles, even if I can't touch or feel them, the fact that there is no time, but I can use the principles to my advantage, use the principles of fluidity to my advantage. We can bend time. Not everybody does it because we've got such deep programming that tells us otherwise, tells us that this isn't true. But I can assure you, we can. We can bend time. And in fact, in a number of classes and training courses that I've taken, that was hinted at. And therefore, out of curiosity, I've tried it. And you can. You can't change the time out there, but you can definitely change the time in which you are existing by a few minutes, maybe, and sometimes longer.
You also talk about somatics, which was new to me. In the sense, I'd never knew it was called somatics. I had watched the movie The Secret where we had seen vibration shaping matter. So somatics is what frequency or vibration organizing matter, creating shapes in matter. But you explain that certain higher vibrations, frequencies would create more, geometrical, complex,
Yes,
beautiful kind of
absolutely.
shapes. Um, could you talk to us about what you learnt through your research about cymatics and what it
Yes.
means for?
So cymatics is the science of visual sound in a nutshell. Um, and what's quite funny and ironic is that again, as I went researching cymatics, I realized, hold on a second, you find who was the first person to discover cymatics, and then although it wasn't called cymatics at the time, and that there'll be somebody else, like Leonardo da Vinci discovered it, and somebody else discovered it before that, and somebody else discovered it. But I came across while I was doing the research, and there are many helpful sites that can take you on magnificent journeys. Cymatics helps us to realize that there is a lot more to sound and vibration than we've been led to believe. And it was one of the pieces of my puzzle to recognize that everything that I had gone and learned in neurolinguistic programming um, had more of a substantiation and context all of a sudden because cymatics, um, yes, it shapes reality. For example, there's an opera singer whose name I completely, whose full name I forget, but she wanted to measure her own power of her own voice. And so she created this very simple instrument which she could blow into to to um, to measure the strength of her own voice and her own lung. So she expected to find that whatever rice or powder or whatever she had put on this instrument, which is basically a hollow instrument that you could blow into, and it would have some kind of animal skin or some kind of sheet on top of it. So she expected all of this to be blown off. But instead, what she realized that as she sank into this, I think it's edogram or edophone, she discovered that everything just started to form shapes. And the higher her vibration was, the more complex the shapes were. Now, Many people have done this before her, after her. But what was interesting was that she was an opera singer. She was not a scientist. And she had made this, um, invented this very simple apparatus just to measure her own voice. What was striking for me about her and why I put her in my book was because the patterns that she created as a result of singing were patterns that you see in nature. There were trees, there were balloons, um, there were tunnels, there were flowers, there were sunflowers, there were all sorts of different shapes. And you begin to wonder when people say birds singing first thing in the morning is a signal to the flowers. So you begin to wonder, how is everything connected? And how little do we really understand about the true nature of reality and our own interaction with it? So cymatics is it's a fascinating, in my opinion, it's a fascinating science yet to be explored a lot more. And it's not just physical, it's not just, yeah, it's not just physical things like dry rice or flour, but also water. Cymatics does sound does incredible things to water, which again are phenomena that we have not yet fully explored.
Right. Yeah. And you do cover that also in your book about the impact of frequency on water as discovered by, that was Dr. Tiller and Dr. Emoto.
Those are actually thought, yes.
Right. So I was going to say, because given that we're, what, 70% water, what does that mean when we think about the impact of sound? And you do cover this point about given that sound vibration can affect matter and water, and we're 70% water,
Yes.
what does this mean for us? What should
Well,
we know?
everything begins with the thought. In fact, perhaps the entire galaxies and universe has been created by thought, but everything begins with a thought. And so, what Dr. Emoto had discovered was that thoughts create patterns in water and affect the water because water we now know is programmable, just like crystals. But because he hadn't used what they call controlled, in a scientific experiment, you always need a control, and the control is the same as the other, if you like, tubes or microbes or whatever that you're going to experiment on. But this has to be remained in an environment where it cannot be influenced by the experiments itself. And then that is your control, which you measure against. Because he hadn't used that scientific method, he was very much discarded, called a pseudoscientist, etc. Then came Dr. Tiller, and what I found interesting about Dr. Teller was he used a very, very simple experiment, which was to change the pH of water. And by demonstrating through experiment that indeed thought, intent can travel through the consciousness of not just us, but the consciousness field that surrounds us, and then can reach the water and program the water to change its pH. And this was measured against a control. There was no way to go back because we now understood that obviously thoughts create. Now, thoughts lead to vibrations within us, so every thought will have its own frequency and vibration, and it will create a wave. So, I remember many, many years ago, a clairvoyant said to me, "You're extremely sensitive. I would highly recommend that you become discerning about the kind of music you listen to." And I used to, I was quite young. I used to listen to love songs and I used to listen to this and that. And after that, when I started to listen to certain things, I was like, oh my God, I'm bringing all of this into my reality. And then 10, 15 years later, another healer just very randomly started to go, poet, poet, poet. Who's the poet in your family? And I said, that would be my father. She said, you have been listening to poetry since a very young age, and this has formed a huge part of your life. And when she explained why, I realized how much sound has affected my life since a very young age. And so, yes, it makes you become much more selective about the exposure that you have in your life.
So this, you think about when we say you don't want to be around certain people, they have a bad energy, or you don't want to hear them, they talk negatively for some. It's more than just, oh, I just don't want to be around that. It's also like the sound vibration, because we are all entangled, we're all connected. But you do really need to be discerning around, um, I guess, sound and energy that you are, or the environment
Yes,
that
absolutely.
you are.
And given that is so important, most people aren't even aware that they are being affected by these kind of energies. So, I would encourage people to look into it more.
And of course, the same, I was gonna say, could be in reverse, uplifting music, wonderful, and in your case, poetry, and I guess you could go a little nuts, but and we can get to, you know, how you take all this information in and how you live your life, because um, you could go, okay, every thought has energy, every emotion has energy, and start getting a little paranoid about that. But I think there is a way to kind of take all this knowledge in and,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yes.
I wanna
Yes.
I wanted to go back to water because, I see a lot, I get targeted a lot on Instagram with ads of people writing codes on labels on water, programming water. Have you experimented to that degree? Do you have a special water bottle? Is it a certain color? What tips?
So
What could we be?
I have experimented with water. I have experimented with water with putting my name, my date of birth, and the frequency that I wanted to put in the water. And I have put this underneath the water just to energize it. I've worked with homeopaths where all of a sudden I have been at a distance and something has happened, and I would be calling them, going, "Oh my God, I'm feeling this and this," and they would say, "Right, this is what I need you to put," and they knew what frequency that we needed, so they would give me the name of what I needed, and I would apply the same principle, and then after about 20 minutes, half an hour, you lift the water and you activate it and you drink it. Now, in the first case of putting, for example, love, just simple frequency of love into the water, I have I have had situations where I've given people 2 glasses of water and I've said, I won't tell you which one, but why don't you taste it? And more often than not, they tell me that the one that has been energized with love is softer, and it tastes different. So I believe just gratitude is probably one of the most powerful energies. So I have uh, what you would call a very massive water filter, which is very portable, but still, and underneath that, I have a sheet of paper that has love and gratitude on it. Um, we've known for even scientists, this is mainstream now. We've known for many years that you can program crystals. We, in fact, know that we can store a lot of data on crystals. We know that we can take a lot of energy from quartz, which is in our watches. So it's not really so woo-woo uh, or voodoo out there that water can be energized, and your lymphatic system around your body is water. And I believe that your emotions are carried in your lymphatic system. Yeah.
I think the writing of the, gratitude, do you think it's more the energetic intent, as opposed to the piece of paper itself? Like you've had that intent, you've had that thought process, you've then grounded that with an action by writing on it. And therefore there is something in you energetically that knows you have, energized it with gratitude, as opposed to there being any sort of inherent, capability of the piece of paper that you've written that word gratitude
Well,
on.
it's an interesting question because I was asked a similar kind of question a few days ago, and my answer is everything is one. So when the same energy is running through me, the pen, the paper, and the water, and all you're doing it is you're connecting it all and you're giving it a pathway. So of course it's your intent. At the end of the day, you are passing an information because apart from energy, frequency, and vibration, the most fundamental thing, even underneath that, that creates the nature of reality or creates reality is information in the field. And so what you're doing is you're essentially taking that information, um, you're directing that information, and you're creating that intent, and it lands. And now you are, so I have manifested that word on a piece of paper. Now it's in 3D. It goes underneath the water. It's not so far-fetched to believe that that intent now will resonate and will go inside and program the water as such. So, how can I put this? From my experience, everything is the same. Everything is one. It's one energy that is running through everything. This is one of the most fundamental things that I have experienced. And so for me, it's just a matter of connecting the dots. Yeah.
And actually, I read a fascinating book recently that really talked about the mechanics of consciousness. And it said, first, we need to expand your definition of consciousness. You are taught to believe it's just exists in biological matter, that when in fact it's in everything. It's
Mm.
the experience, the observer and the observed.
Absolutely.
As
Everything.
as I also read in, one of Deepak Chopra's book, which even just sitting and thinking about that, it's the observer and the observed, or the experiencer and the experienced, is quite mind-boggling.
This goes back to the John Wheeler thing, by the way. This is exactly what he was talking about. There is no universe out there if there is no observer. There is no phenomena out there unless there is an observer of the phenomena. So you are constantly the observer and the observed yourself. And I find that uh, if we can wrap our head around that and reprogram ourselves to recognize the magnificence of who we actually are, then we can take all of these principles from ancient wisdom and quantum physics to serve us rather than to try and put it into measuring things uh, to understanding it or utilizing it. It's a little bit like what Nikola Tesla was doing it. He said, I can't prove the existence of scalar, but I know how to harness it. So it's more about how can I use this kind of principle to serve me, if that makes sense.
It does, and we often hear about, the universe isn't out there, the universe or the consciousness, that you exist within your consciousness. And I've often tried to wrap my head around that. So hang on, me and the world exists within my own consciousness. It's sort of, okay, I get it, but I also don't experience it like that. It feels very much like I'm a part of this physical world. But then, the point about the dream state, when we're dreaming and it feels very, very real, very vivid, then you can start to understand how that exists in your consciousness. So then you can sort of kind of
Oh,
go, okay, well, if that feels very real and it literally is existing in my consciousness while I'm asleep, then we can begin to understand how the waking world exists in our consciousness, and that
absolutely.
everything therefore is consciousness.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly. Yes, exactly.
Now, you touched on it before about reality creation or, manifestation. I guess through the quantum lens, how do you understand how we create our own reality? Or we can better create our own reality because we already are probably quite naturally.
So we create our reality through our special, unique lens. One of the things that we are not taught at a young age is that your unique perspective um, is worth developing. And so we often, if you look at this 7 billion people, and you look at individual particular families, you will find that children are often following the footsteps of parents, and then having particular tendencies to certain diseases or diseases, or certain genetic, oh, the father was like this, so the son is like this. I believe this is not necessarily the case. The potential genetically does exist, obviously, but that's the information field, in my opinion. So we create our reality through our thoughts, which are based on our belief system, which is based on our programming. Now, me personally, um, I would say I discovered about myself that I had a lot of corrupt programming. I had been brought up in Iran. There was cultural influences, there were family influences, there were particular upbringing methodology, and on top of that, there was religious influences. So all of these had given me a very distorted view of reality and my participation in it. So um, I think religion, for example, is a fantastic thing if it makes you become a better person and it gives you peace and happiness. Hands down, it's serving you. It wasn't serving me. And the reason is I felt disempowered. I felt there was a God out there somewhere. I was being judged. I was not good enough. I was told if I did X, Y, and Z, I was a bad girl. And so all of these kind of things were very disempowering. Once I stumbled across what is actually happening, and there is the observer effect, and the fact that me, by what I thought, I was creating my reality in terms of we're living life backwards. We are expecting to create tomorrow through the mind. Think how you can do it. That's not actually supposed to be at all the way we create reality. Reality comes from your imagination. Reality is coming from your vibrations. Reality is coming from the information that is surrounding you based on your vibration. So what does that mean? It means that once you have ownership that you are creating your reality, then you own the moment in which you are sitting, and you begin to accept everything as is. But then you can also begin to use your imagination to step into what it would feel like to have a different reality, and what would it look like. But you can't go there before accepting that you've created this moment, because every moment is only happening in now. Whether it's yesterday, I can only experience it in the now, and tomorrow. This is something that is now becoming much more of a popular topic and much more acceptable for people. So we're safe to say that everything is happening in the moment. Creating our own reality means being bold and brave enough to accept that we are the creator. And this is a principle that doesn't sit right or well with a lot of people who cannot accept that responsibility or don't want to What are you talking about? Are you saying that all the pain and suffering that I went through? Yes, at some level. It doesn't mean we're good or bad, and it doesn't mean that there is any judgment to be had, but it does mean owning it. And once we own that, then we can go ahead and create the reality that we've always dreamed of. Does
I
that
must admit, yeah, that makes great sense. And, in the last, well, however many years, I've been exploring the nature of reality and, how to create my own reality, probably decades, I should say. Obviously, haven't mastered it, getting there, but definitely belief systems. I've definitely gone out of victimhood, and I do the question of what must I believe to be feeling this way, and allowing and not judging myself, allowing myself to feel the emotion, and but then saying, okay, well, where did I get that belief from, and is that actually real? And where did I get it from? And actually, then going, well, what do I want to believe? And then to your point about what does that feel? What would that feel like? And then
Yeah,
what emotions come from that belief? And then what actions would I take? Which I guess is where you densify that belief in physical reality. So I've,
100%.
yeah, and and it's very, very liberating and empowering. And it stops you from being a victim, from blaming, and really, as to your point before about taking accountability as a creator, as a co-creator.
Yes. And I mean,
Mm.
responsibility has a very heavy connotation where, in actual fact, it's the ability to respond. And so when we say, I have the ability to respond, I am going to take that and I'm going to take that ability and make it mine, then it means that it doesn't mean that things don't go wrong because they do. And I would argue that you are creating your reality very well because you have made the changes that you've made in your life. For example, just what I know of in the last 6 months is just in the last 6 months. I think it's phenomenal, but we are very tough by nature on ourselves. And we tend to be very outward rather than inward in terms of looking at our own development and saying, right, what else can I fine tune? But as I explained to someone yesterday or the day before when they were going through a bit of difficult moment, and I said, this is a great opportunity. They were like, well, how so? I said, well, everything things go wrong for me. I immediately asked, what was I thinking? What was I feeling? How did that happen? What was ah, I put such a great onus on something. When you attach a great importance to something, so much so, the pressure of it creates resistance. And so we want to have as little resistance as possible. So it's kind of like no biggie, no biggie. And uh, I would definitely say that owning creative power will change your life. But also, that's why food, love, and quantum physics, because love, self love, is a very, very important part of this journey. You can't become a creator, a effective creator that serves you without that self love, because judgment will get you into a completely different frequency than the creative mode. So you constantly have to be in that self love mode. Constantly, I appreciate it's maybe not practical, but what I mean by that is the recognition that that is the space that serves you most. And yeah,
I was going to go back to the title of your book and, let's talk about love. In quantum terms, how do you understand love? And I guess, can it be, are we talking unconditional love here as like a base frequency of consciousness? Oh, well, how do you understand it?
I I would say for me, there is a source. There is a source of all creativity. And if I had the source as the energy that runs through everything, the power of the source I would call love. So I experience love as the most powerful um, m- and well, the most powerful glue that connects everything. It is in everything. And it is the force that says it just is. It doesn't judge, and by nature, it is unconditional. We, however, have not been taught that. And in fact, love has been associated in a way with vulnerability, which is the exact opposite of what it really is. And so I think we need, perhaps I would suggest, we need to contextualize love in order to really understand it. It's a little bit like the resentment or some people say, oh, I don't want to use the word God because God has many connotations. And I get that because love has many connotations. But in actual fact, love is probably the strongest force that has ever existed or that ever will. It is pure source. And I believe it connects everything, but it also allows us to purify ourselves, which is why, love associated with the heart. And then we discover that heart is potentially the portal to everything else, to the whole universe. And so I think love is connectivity, the power to connect.
I love that. It's so beautiful. Yeah.
Food.
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 Let's talk about the energy or the frequency of food and how does that affect, I guess, or does it have an effect on us biologically, chemically? We're ingesting food in a state of happiness, or if food brings us a lot of pleasure, does that have a direct chemical effect on us that benefits us, or conversely?
100%. Yes. Food, it's not just the food in itself, although obviously, if we can consume food as close as nature produced it, then we are accepting that the gift, the intelligence that is nature. But I definitely think there's a lot to be said for pleasure. We are here for experience. We are here for the pleasure. So I don't think anyone should feel a sense of deprivation when we're going through food. There are so many different schools of thought out there about what's good for you, what's not good for you. This goes back to the discussion about individuality. I think it is so important that people embrace their own individuality and don't look left or right necessarily trying to figure out what is right. There is no right except what is right for you. What I discovered was lighter food. The most natural foods are definitely the best food for you. Seasonal food is pretty important for you. Which blood type you are and where you are born, what kind of food is natural to your ancestors. I believe that plays a certain role in your well-being. But most importantly, who is touching your food and what kind of thought and vibrations. If Dr. Tiller's experiment is anything to go by, the fact that you can transmit through thought the a certain energy vibration that could change the biological molecular structure of something, then in many ways, I'm not sure I want to go to a restaurant where everybody's shouting and screaming at the food in the kitchen. Or somebody who's really angry. I've experienced when I'm cooking, and if I'm not really, I'm kind of thinking and I'm frustrated, the food more than often comes out wrong. And it's because I'm not present with the food. There is no love with the food. We go to restaurants all the time where we not me per se, but I mean, all of us, we go to restaurants and we say, oh my God, there was so much love in that food, but we don't really give it that much thought after that statement is made. Whereas I genuinely believe there is a lot to be said for that. And I discovered that the food was healing me purely because of the way I was showing up to cook. And that relationship with me was created through the food. It's almost as if your body becomes your child as you grow older and older. And you're looking after this child in the same way you would any child. So the more you are present for it, the more you are in connection with it, the more those subtle, intuitive voices begin to talk back.
Mm.
So yeah, I believe food, and also food has its own vibrations. Like for example, purple food versus orange food versus white food versus these color codes are all telling us something. So there's a lot more to it than that. Having said that, as I said, I think previously to you, the more I learn, the less I know. Uh,
Mm.
but this is an exciting journey, and I don't think the learning should ever finish. Otherwise, I'm sure we would be bored.
No, exactly. I found that fascinating. There's just so many more questions I could just ask on food alone. But in the interest of time, I just want to just switch gears and then I want to talk about when your book is going to be coming out. But we talk a lot, or we explore a lot about channeling. And you mentioned you went to a psychic previously. I've been to psychics myself. I've been to mediums. How does quantum physics, or what does quantum physics, through your discoveries, taught you about how to understand how psychics, uh, how psychic works, how mediumship works, as in how their gifts, how they have these gifts, how it's possible to have these gifts, and I guess as well as channeling, which I know is a little different.
Yes, well, yes and no. It is not an experience that I would say I've had, even though not strictly true. In theta healing, when I trained as a theta healer, it was the first time that you could say I went for answering people through the field, talking to the field and talking to the source. And in theta healing, we are taught that the only energy to have a dialogue with should be the source. And through the source, you can then speak to other entities or dimensions, if you like. From my experience, I would say, from my experience, I understand that the more you can become a blank canvas to a point where you can give up your identity, to become an empty vessel almost, to become detached from the identity that you know, the more you can become a vessel for other energies to run through you. So, some of the most amazing shamanic healers or channelers have told me that they are not doing anything themselves. They are simply the witness of. And what's interesting is, again, it takes us back to the Copenhagen interpretation of the observer and the observed, or the Krishnamurti, um, who was one of the was amazing philosophers, who also talked about this observation and witnessing. So, in theta healing, for example, we are taught that when we ask a question or when we request a change in energy, like, for example, we were taught how to clear the energy of a room. And so, after doing whatever it is that you're doing, you're taught you do this, you do this, you do this, and then you request what it is that you're asking for. Then you solidify it by saying, it is done. Show me. And that is the moment where you have to be almost present and accept that your word, your permission to the field is enough because you are the creator. And you actually use your imagination to witness what is happening and how the energy of the room is shifting. This is what I mean about the power of the individual. If we have been robbed of that since childhood, it's one thing. But at some point, we need to wake up and choose how we want to carry on with our life. And many of the philosophies or schools of thought that I have come across, including quantum physics, including some of the ancient wisdom, tells me that we are indeed um, in charge of a lot more than we think. And when we are not aware of it, it doesn't change anything. We're still creating our own reality, but perhaps from a place of disempowerment and from a place of lack. So, channelers and healers, in my opinion, are people who have truly embodied the knowledge and they know that they can communicate with the field. And so that's what they are doing. They're communicating through the field um, and leveraging this connectivity of all things. So I've had situations where someone sick in my family was being observed through me, even though they'd never met the person in my family, because everything is connected. And the moment I bring up their name, you can tune into them. But to finally really bring this home for people who may think, again, this is all just voodoo stuff, I would highly recommend that people look into remote viewing, which is something that in the 1960s the Russians started, the Russian military. And then the US and various other governments went, oh my God, well, we don't really believe in it, but we have to look into it because if they think it's real, then maybe they can do stuff we can't do. And so this is something that has been going on for many, many years where almost ordinary people, and I say almost, obviously they aim to pick people with highest potential, but almost every single person can be trained to remote view by me, for example, giving you um, saying, Genevieve, I'm giving you these coordinates. I'd like you to meditate, get into a space of Zen, clear your mind, nothing else. What do you see, or can you draw what these coordinates represent? And you will be shocked that after training, people can all tap into, they either draw a house or they draw a round circle, and then they show them the photo of what really was. And it's usually they've picked up exactly what is there. So this phenomena
Mm.
is only a phenomena because it's not part of our teaching.
Yeah.
Once it becomes something that we accept, then it's no longer magic, but it is magical.
Yeah. And I was really surprised actually because remote viewing is something I've only really just discovered and through various teachers that are actually teaching people how to do it only recently. And I was very surprised to hear of a woman saying she worked at the CIA as a remote viewer in the 80s. And I was like, wow, on many levels. Wow. So they had knowledge, our governments, for many years, for many decades on this capability. So it's not woo woo. And they're using that in their, I guess, as a form of, I don't know, intelligence,
There
spying,
are,
whatever it is.
yeah, no, I mean, even today, there are people who um, protect and defend certain sensitive buildings or projects, etc., psychically. So if you try to remote view certain areas, you will be psychically attacked. Um, and this is a real thing.
Yeah.
Um, but
And of
it goes
course,
back to the connectivity of all things,
yeah.
basically. Yeah.
And of course, and also a point that you said before our interview, we talked about there is no one truth because I've heard remote viewers talk about what they've seen when they've, got almost, it's basically like some of them have had like more like near death experiences where they actually feel like they leave their body
Yes.
and they go traveling kind of thing. I'm sure there's various different ways of remote viewing. And some of the stuff I was thinking, what? Like, really? But then I was like, well, hang on a sec. All truths, all experiences, all explorations are valid, but it
One,
doesn't mean there's one single source of truth.
yes.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it wouldn't make sense if there was only one truth. It literally would not make sense. So the wisest thing I've ever heard is what a waste of time to try and get someone to see your perspective. And it really is. The only thing that I would say, and the reason for my book, for example, is to share. You can share from an authentic place where you are. And I often make the analogy that life is like being on this massive mountain that is never ending. And you've got 7 billion, 8 billion people, for example, this earth. You got 7, 8 billion people on this never ending mountain. And everybody's, you're asking them, what do you see? And everybody's seeing something different because they're all standing in different perspectives. So for us to be able to, it's a privilege to hear somebody else's opinions and ideas. And for me to say that today is a huge thing because I come from a family where it was so imperative to be right. And so I've had to, and I still do, I catch myself going, oh my God, but that's not right. And then I go, right for whom? So I constantly have to pull myself back and self observe as to why I still believe that could be the truth or not the truth. There is no one truth.
All of this information, all of these discoveries, that were like over 2 centuries years worth of discoveries or more, like you say, the Vedas tradition, for example, thousands of years old. But even scientific discoveries through quantum physics, you know, we're just not taught any of this in school.
Yeah.
And I think, God, my life could have been different if I was taught some of this, all of us, not just me, if we were taught some of this stuff in school. My goodness, I wouldn't have wallowed in so much pain and misery. And of course, that was my journey. Maybe I chose this life and decided to go on that journey. But do you think, and to your point earlier when you said, we just didn't know back then and but do you think that this is something really we should start educating our children about? And if we need it to be fully scientific, we have these discoveries. So how do we
100%.
introduce that? And I guess what do you feel about the education of
I think
children?
the education system at the moment can go through a major restructuring and reevaluation. Um, we are not necessarily looking at the individual talents of children at the moment, and I don't feel that we're harnessing and developing and nurturing and almost incubating their and it's seeing how we can navigate them better to develop their own expressiveness through life. Um, so education system to one side, I think we as parents, if you like, and I'm not a parent, but I have a lot of children around me and I see a lot of parents, my friends, my own family. We have we have all our own programming, but can we be wise enough not to pass that on to the next generation, but to allow them to develop their own thoughts and ideas about things? Number one. Number two, should the emphasis be on happiness rather than on learn this and regurgitate? But should it be more about what makes them happy? Because from a happy place, you can create anything. Happiness creates gratitude. Gratitude is one of the highest vibrations you could possibly have. So, we, my suggestion would be, how do we find a way to break the chain? We've all been programmed through lack of knowledge of our ancestors, can we get better at recognizing that while we are working on fine tuning and polishing ourselves, that we refrain from passing our fears, our resentments, and so on and so forth to the next children, realizing that they are full souls first and foremost, complete souls. They're here for a journey. And it would be great not to stand in their way, so to speak. So 100%, we could we could really empower them by explaining to them that this is a participatory universe, and how they show up in the world is how they will experience the world. There is no right or wrong, but how they experience the world perhaps matters to them. And you and I know that we've been through School of Hard Knocks in many ways, and it's great. We are who we are today as a result of it. And yet, could we have learned those lessons in a much more harmonious way? I don't know. It's a question.
And just a couple more questions before we wrap up is, and you did touch on this before, but with everything you've explored, consciousness, quantum physics, like what is the purpose of it all?
So this was a question that probably I've had since I don't know, since I can remember. And for me, it was something I really needed to know because otherwise everything was without purpose for me. I believe we are here to experience and expand. And I believe we are here to experience the best possibility and potential of who we are individually. The one thing that I would emphasize is unique experience. Um, this is a very important point, which I didn't know. I had to learn. Then it completely made sense to me. Why is unique experience important? Because if unique experience wasn't important, we would be all born the same, look the same, feel the same, be in the same place, etc. We have this incredible, colorful background, all of us from different parts, all of us with different upbringings, with different schools of thought. This is what we can harness to have these unique experiences and creations from our in our lives. So I think we were born to experience the best, to leverage the and utilize everything that life has to offer, and to be part of the expansion that is the universe. And I believe, and I know, and I've experienced this. In order to have a better life out there, we constantly have to fine tune here. There is nothing that exists out there that doesn't start from in here. So everything begins in here, and the purpose is to refine ourselves. So every experience is teaching us the direction in which we can expand or we have expanded. So when we're having a really bad experience, it's something that needs refining in here. Everything is a mirror, everything is teaching us something about us. But we are the universe and the universe is us. So I believe it's about the expansion of the greater mind, the collective consciousness, so to speak. That's what I believe. Until further notice, I do reserve
I,
the right to change my mind.
yeah, and I'm right there with you in that. So, if you could leave one final message with our listeners, what do you want to land in their hearts?
It's better to live with love. It's better to learn that judgment doesn't serve us. To lead with the heart and to lead with love is going to be a much more pleasurable life. Um, and there are always things to be grateful for, even when it feels like there's nothing to be grateful for. If you can stand back far enough to a point where you are no longer your character, but you're watching your character as if they're a character in a movie, you will see all the things to be grateful for, and you are far more powerful than been led to believe.
Thank you. And Pooya, when can we expect to see Food, Love, and Quantum Physics out on the shelves? Or probably more apt these days is on Amazon.
The book is going through its final edit, especially the very, very final part. It is in three parts. Um, and I expect the final edits to be done during February and March. So we are now, I say we because I am working with a number of people to reach out to agents because I would like to publish the book very traditionally. Uh, because I believe that they have far more experience than I do into making sure that I would like it to be translated into as many languages as possible because it's a very simple story, I hope. And I'm really wishing that before summer it hits the shelves or the Amazon shelf. But who knows? Yeah, I'm really hoping as soon as possible, really.
Well, I absolutely loved what I read. I couldn't put it down, even though I was reading it
Thank
on my
you.
phone.
Thank you.
It was fascinating, and I'm sure everyone's going to love it, especially our listeners.
Thank you.
Pooya, really appreciate your time. I was so excited to talk to you and ask you all my questions and share your amazing information with our listeners. So thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to reading your book.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure, and thank you so much for having me. I really, really do appreciate it. I've always enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you for the great conversation. And thank you to everyone listening.